Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday to you all. Welcome to our event this morning, our Tech Talk event called Exploring the Future of Cities. Most of you probably know my name is Kevin Tour. I will be your host for the event this morning, and I'm the Vice President of Data and Advanced Technologies at Communitech. And my group is focused on helping our companies do more with data, do more with advanced technologies, and adopt them in a strategic fashion. And as well, we're in different times, of course, and please know that at Communitech, we're working hard to bring you businesses virtual as much as possible, while also supporting our members the best we can. And of course, if there's anything we can do to help you in any way, please feel free to reach out to us. Before we kick things off, though, I would like to take a moment to thank all of our courageous frontline workers for everything that they continue to do, through the pandemic now, and will undoubtedly continue to do as we go forward. So we want to thank you all for all your efforts and everything that you do. It's very much appreciated. So today we're talking about the future of cities, and historically, I think we've often spoke around the context of smart cities. And I think that's a bit problematic, and we want to change the flavor of that a bit this morning with our event, because the smart cities tends to conjure up the notion of technology first. And whereas what we want to do is we want to focus on the well-being of the citizens, and focusing on that as being paramount. So we need to have a conversation around what is it we can do for citizens of cities. And not only do we want to explore the opportunities, but we also understand that there are challenges that come along with that dialogue. So we want to be able to explore all of that. And of course, COVID-19 has put a new spin on the topic. I think we're talking a lot more about resilience. We're talking about inclusivity. So certainly the notion of what does the future of cities look like has changed since the pandemic has come into existence. And I think it's also brought forth the notion of we need to be an adaptive city. We need to have adaptive cities, and we need to be able to respond to situations quickly. And we also believe that at the core of that, we need to make good decisions about how we respond. And of course, that's very much rooted in data. It helps us make our decisions, but also helps us to measure effectiveness. So today, I'd say one of the primary goals of our event today is to invoke action. And if I may quote Thomas Edison, he said, "Vision without execution is hallucination." And that's very much the case here. And so we do want to focus on using this as a catalyst to start doing some very tactical and some very specific things as we move forward. So before we do that and get into our panelists, we've assembled a great group of panelists this morning for framing the conversation from both the public sector and the private sector. And I'll get to introducing them momentarily. A couple things though, more housekeeping, if you will. We do want to hear from our audience, and we have a couple ways that we want to engage you and get your opinion and get you to weigh in on the conversation. There is a Q&A function within Zoom, and we encourage you throughout the session to add your questions there. We will curate those, and we'll do our best to get to those during the Q&A session after the panelist presentations. But we do want to hear from you that way. And also, there will be a couple polls that will come up at different times throughout the session this morning to get you weigh in some specific issues. And that will help us continue to frame the conversation, but it'll help us to understand the flavor or the vision, or start building some sort of consensus around what the future of cities looks like. And of course, along with that, if at any point you have a need for technical assistance, if you're having any trouble of any sort, just put a comment in the chat section or email us at events@communitech.ca, and we'll do our best to help you with whatever problem that you may be experiencing. So with that, why don't we get over to our panelists and introduce them. And first, I'd like to introduce Mike Murray. Mike is the CEO of the region of Waterloo. And Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the region?
Great. Well, thanks, Kevin. Great to be here. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Mike Murray. I'm the CIO with the region of Waterloo. So I'm the senior staff person bureaucrat in the fondest of ways. I report directly to Regional Council. Some of you I know are familiar with the region of Waterloo. For those of you who aren't, the region includes about 600,000 people, and the region of Waterloo is responsible for everything from public health, which has been fascinating over the last 3 or 4 months, public health, social services, physical infrastructure, so transit, regional roads, water, wastewater, and kind of everything in between, broad scale land use planning and all the support functions. So about 3,000 people, employees, serving a community of 600,000 people. And I'm an engineer by background and training. Been working for the region for longer than I can remember, about 28 years. In my current job, about 15. And just passionate about city building. I think we're doing some cool things in Waterloo region, and we just want to keep on that path. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. And I understand you're on your final tour of duty as well as CAO, and so we're thrilled to have you on your farewell tour as part of our event.
Yep, 2 more weeks. Who's counting?
Apparently you. Okay, awesome. And also we have Neil Dale. He's the Director of Innovation and Partnerships at Rogers Communications. And over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel with Mike and Cash. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Innovation and Partnerships within the large organization that Rogers is. I sit within the technology org, and what we've been spending a lot of time around these days is 5G and the potential of 5G. And so this topic is very relevant to us in that 5G, I believe, is going to be a critical piece of the infrastructure for cities of the future. As you know, we've been also very engaged in Communitech. We have our 5G Create Lab there that we established at the end of last year. And we're continuing to do a lot of our work virtually in partnership with Communitech. I also have some of the research partnerships that we manage across the country, including the University of British Columbia and the University of Waterloo, where a lot of our research is focused on smart cities as well. Thanks, Kevin.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Neil. Very much appreciate it. And finally, we got Kashmir Self, who's the AVP of Strategy and Emerging Solutions Delivery at Interact. Welcome, Cash.
Hey, Kevin, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Kashmir Self. Everybody calls me Cash. I lead a group that's focused around evaluating trends, evaluating emerging technologies, and we help develop what the enterprise-wide strategies are for Interact, but really with a longer-term horizon because we sit under the innovation umbrella. We also, similar to Rogers, we also have a lab out of Communitech that's led by Trisha. And so we look at them and work very closely with them on how we take these trends and emerging technologies and actually do a bunch of trials to test them out in market. A little bit going, outside of my core job at Interact, we everybody knows, all of you know who we are. We really are that payment network with that rich history. I think what is different today than it was many years ago is that as there's this blurring of lines across industries, as we move toward a broader data economy, we are also transforming our business into that of an information exchange and where we could potentially service Canadians and service Canadian businesses within this new arena. I know myself and many of us at Interact, we have this ethos around who we are and how we operate. And we truly believe that we want people to live their best possible life, which is why I'm delighted to be here today. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, this is fantastic, and we're gonna put you all to work now. And again, we're looking to have a great conversation here, and we're going to engage our audience. And again, I want to say to the audience, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A function within Zoom, so we can get to them later. But all right. I think it's let's get right into it here, and let's start with vision. So, we talk about smart cities, we talk about the future of cities. Let's talk about utopia. What does the ideal future city look like, and why does it matter? So, not to put you on the spot, Mike, but why don't you kick us off?
There we go. Yeah, I'm going to come at it from a couple different directions. In Waterloo region, So it's an interesting question, and I think the answer to this question is it depends. And I think we got to keep in mind that cities, when we're talking about cities, if you think globally, cities look different, feel different, function differently in different parts of the world. So here we are, kind of first world, we've got a certain vision of what a city looks like. That may not be shared by people in other parts of the world. So that's, I think, one thing to keep in mind is there's not a one size fits all ideal city. So that's just kind of comment one. Secondly, and I think this will resonate with lots of you, I think when we talk about ideal city, we need to take like a user-centric view, a resident, citizen-centric view, and say, what do people need and want in their city? How do they want to interact with it? How do they want it to work with them? And again, that may differ in different parts of the world and in different communities. Small, medium, large cities function differently. So I just think putting the resident, the citizen at the center of this whole conversation is critically important. Having said all that, in Waterloo region for years, decades, we've had a vision that we talk about creating inclusive, thriving, sustainable community. And I think, those three concepts can really drive a lot of work, a lot of thinking about cities. So, if I think about ideal, I would think inclusive, thriving, sustainable. And the other thing is we put our city building work in a global context. How do we link some of the work that we're doing with, broader sort of global international goals, things like greenhouse gas reduction, greater equity for people, housing for all. Those are things that big picture things that are being talked about are all around the world. So I'd go with inclusive, thriving, sustainable, and how do we move forward on some global goals. Thanks.
And Cash, how does that align with what your thoughts are around what an ideal future city looks like, either from your perspective or Interact's?
I'm actually going to start with my kids' perspective. So in preparation for this today, I was like, so I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and learning from home is very difficult, and I'm not a teacher. And so we use dinner time usually as an opportunity to try and have some normal conversation, maybe to shed a little bit of light on some stuff. And so I asked both my kids last night, what would they think a future city would look like? And so my daughter, who's 9, you guys will chuckle because her response was like, you mean on Earth? Because we'll have Falcon 9 and we can go anywhere else outside of Earth and we won't have to deal with the pollution that's in Earth. And so I was like, oh gosh, now how do I go and help her understand that, yeah, that's a lovely idea, kid, but really let's get down to real life here because there's a lot of hurdles that we need to get over first here. And then I was like, do I even bother asking my son, who's 6? Because I'm sure he would have had something like buildings made of chocolate and, clouds made of candy floss or something ridiculous like that. So I was like, okay, my learning opportunity with my teaching opportunity with my kids has probably got to stop, and I got to give this some thought. And so for real, in terms of what I think and what Interact thinks a future city could potentially look like, well, there are a few data contributing factors. One is there's tons and tons of people that are living in cities, more so now than ever before. And in Canada, that number is only going to go up. We right now have just over 80%. By 2030, it's going to get up to about 84%. And by 2050, they're saying about 88, 87%. Lots and lots of people. What else we know is that as these cities continue to grow, there's going to be even greater strain on the infrastructure that is required to provide the services, to service businesses, to service the people that living in those cities. And the way that we operate today, it simply will not work. And so a greater amount of consideration needs to be given to like solving what the root cause of the problems are, as opposed to just putting a Band-Aid and addressing the symptoms. And so, major things that a city of the future would look like would be one that factors in, similar to what Mike had said, around environmental sustainability, making sure that we're serving the underserved with challenges such as housing unaffordability, making sure that we factor in inclusion and what the future of work could potentially look like. But all of this is really underpinned by just having better well-being, and better well-being underpinned by innovation for economic prosperity. So that's kind of I know it's very like broad strokes, but I think it sets the stage in terms of that vision of what I know Mike and I, and definitely Neil and I are definitely aligned on.
Excellent. Yeah, I see there's a theme emerging here, which is good, and I love the fact that we're putting people at the core of it. But I love the fact that your 9-year-old said, "What on earth?" You know, why not? I love, you know, there are no constraints on thinking with kids. So, you know, we should definitely, in terms of inclusion, make sure that we include them in the conversation, because it is their world that's coming in. But turning over to Neil, I assume most of what Rogers is working on these days is probably more terrestrial based, but I don't want to.
Yeah, we don't have internet on Mars yet.
Yeah, yeah, so that's good.
So yeah, we still got a ways to go, but I mean, I think it's interesting actually. So, you know, when you say what does an ideal future city look like? I mean, Cash, your 9-year-old is less than a decade away from being in university, actually building what that future city looks like. So, you know, it's probably actually a really good point of view and perspective, because that they're probably closer to the estimation of what that looks like than we would be. So look, I mean, at the end of the day, we've touched on a couple points, but you know, Kevin, off the top, you sort of said we want to move away from, you know, sort of the smart city being all around tech, and I think that's true. I think we've gotten carried away in that from that perspective. But I also think, you know, as Cash sort of spoke about, infrastructure is critical to supporting what these future cities are going to look like, and you know, having, you know, being from an internet company and being somebody who provides connectivity, we really view that connectivity as being a sort of a key piece and a critical element of the infrastructure framework for a city of the future. Just to sort of provide some perspective, I mean, we've all seen some of the data in terms of how much more activity has shifted since COVID-19 to at home. We've seen, you know, in the, you know, high percentage of growth in terms of internet demand over our pipes, and I don't think that's going to slow down. I think that, you know, we've been able to sort of respond effectively to that, but I don't see that, you know, need of this sort of digital infrastructure going away in the city of future. I think we've seen like 40% now of the Canada's workforce is working from home. So some pretty dramatic numbers in terms of the shift to a different mode of operations. And I mean, I think that we're kind of seeing a little bit of what the future city looks like. Less, you know, transportation in terms of public transit potentially, more people walking, cycling, etc. So I think we're starting to see a glimpse of what the future city might look like. And I think from our perspective, that's why we're really kind of investing the time and effort we are on rolling out our 5G network and some of the relationships that we have around 5G, because we believe that that is, again, going to be sort of the underlying fabric of, you know, all of these new use cases that we don't really know what they are. We're getting a bit of, you know, of a glimpse on things like autonomous vehicles. We're starting to see things like smart traffic solutions become more prevalent. So we're starting to get a bit of a flavor, but that's why we're sort of moving quickly, because we know at the end of the day, some of this physical digital infrastructure that's required, like 5G, is going to be, you know, needed to realize some of that potential.
Absolutely, that's great. Well, I'm glad we have an optimistic view of what the future could hold around what the vision of an ideal city looks like. But of course, we can't do that without consideration of what some of the challenges might be in that path towards some of those visions around what an ideal city looks like. So, Cash, I'm gonna turn to you first and just say, what kinds of things, what kind of current challenges do we have within cities that you think putting a future cities lens and everything that comes with it on could improve and create, move us one step forward towards what that ideal city might look like?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's like, if we start to look at what people value today, it's so different than even what people valued, say, 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and what we're actually willing to give up in order to get that perceived value. If I were going to, make it a bit more tangible, I'd say, as a citizen here in Canada, people like myself, people like you guys, we're looking for access to digital access and ease of use in terms of just being able to live and operate, whether it's through licensing, whether it's through permits and taxes, and being able to participate in community services. We want to ultimately look at how do we effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How do we reduce our commute times? I was joking just before we got on this call, my house, I live in the city of Toronto, so my house is literally this big. But that was a trade-off that I was willing to make because I live 7 kilometers from the office and I can actually in the summertime run to work. Transportation around mobility sharing, smart parking, real-time road monitoring, smart traffic signals, a lot of the stuff that I know Mike, in advance of this call when we had a chat, he was saying, the city of Waterloo is already trialing out some of this stuff. And that's how do you effectively have, more efficient waste management? How do you make sure that we've got clean water? How do you make sure that we've got green energy? Have appropriate disaster response mechanisms? And then now more so than probably ever before, and Neil, I'm curious as to what even you would say here, because you touched on COVID and how the way we work and stuff is so different today. And will this continue? Because things like remote health monitoring, of course, I've had a couple of doctor's appointments since we've been working from home. I don't know why I wasn't able to do this before, but it's now the doctor calls me up, she asks me a bunch of questions, and it's I'm done. I've got a physio appointment, first time in a couple of weeks. I'm I've never done physio. I'm but how do they do that? And the physio is purely a result of me sitting at home working all day and not walking around. I'm how are they going to do physio with me? I have no idea how that's going to work. Setting real-time information on health alerts and infectious disease, and very relevant around contact tracing apps today. Those are all things that are a means, but it's being driven by what all of us on this call today are struggling with and are trying to figure out how do we actually get some solutions in place that actually helps address the needs of what all of us as constituents are feeling.
Okay, fantastic. And what I want to do now is I want to just pause for just a second, and why don't we get our first poll up with the audience, and then maybe I'll come back to Neil and Mike to see if they have any comments on what Cash was mentioning there. So it should be showing up on your screen. Just take a little bit of time to fill that out. It should take about 20 or 30 seconds, I think, to get some results. Neil, Mike, anything that you want to add to Cash's comments about the challenges and what the future cities might look like and enabled?
Yeah, I'll hop in. I think future cities, when I think about it, it's about just better decisioning, right? I think it's about being able to make better decisions for people, and that's kind of at the core of, I guess, some of the work that we're doing, and that we've been pursuing. You may have seen some of the work that we have been doing in Kelowna as an example. And so we're looking at a number of different use cases that we're exploring there, but a lot of it is around some of the topics that we've talked about, which are sustainability and safety. All right, so I'm seeing the poll here in real time, am I?
Yeah.
So let me talk about transportation. I think that's actually very relevant, and I can talk a little bit about environment and climate too, because those are very topical in terms of some of the things that we're doing. But we're using things like LiDAR as an example because of its inherent privacy benefits, right? Because it doesn't do sort of facial recognition, and we're leveraging LiDAR as an example to help improve the congestion and traffic flow. So we're integrating it with our traffic signaling system there in a way that we can optimize and optimize traffic flow, but minimize idling as an example, and that helps from a greenhouse gas perspective. So I think there's some interesting use cases from that perspective that, for us in particular, we're very focused on the transportation use case because of its dependency on a network. But we're also looking at some other projects that may not be as obvious. So one of the projects that we've been spending time on is around our earthquake early detection system. And so in British Columbia, we have deployed millions of smart meters across the province, and so we're working with the University of British Columbia on a low latency edge computing application which can detect sort of the tremors, and as a result, it can predict where using the gyrometers on the smart meters where the earthquake might have the largest impact. And then the intent is to proactively integrate into the provincial infrastructure so that we can prevent different types of damage and property loss and save lives. So you can imagine that if you can predict exactly through your deep learning models where you might have the biggest impact, maybe you will close a bridge, maybe you will turn off a power line. And so we're anticipating that, if we're successful with this type of research activity, we might be able to save, potentially up to 70% of the property damage that might occur through an earthquake. So we view that as a really interesting smart city type of application. And it's not one that's obvious, but we're using existing smart meters, and we're adding an element of machine learning and as well connectivity. And that this could have a dramatic impact because, as we know, the West Coast is kind of due for the next big one. So it's not as relevant here in sort of the southwestern Ontario, but these are the types of applications that we're kind of exploring in the context of smart city. They're really quite broad. And back to sort of what Cash said originally, you almost do need your kids to imagine this stuff because I think as you get older, your imagination gets a little more limited, but there's sort of an infinite amount of ways that a city can be smarter, in the future.
Absolutely. And Mike, I'm just kind of curious in terms of the poll results, how does that align with what you see the region of Waterloo's priorities as being?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Really, really interesting. I would say there's great alignment. And what I would take the transportation and just expand on that a little bit. One of the things we would say we focus on is optimizing the use of our existing infrastructure. So transportation's an obvious one, right? We've got a whole built network of roads and transit. How do we get the most value benefit out of that? But the same sort of concepts you can take and apply to water systems, utilities, energy utilities. So I think, smart city solutions for physical infrastructure in general and optimizing the use of them, absolutely. And, when you say optimize, you get, best value for money, as well as kind of sustainability. So totally agree with that. The other that I would have focused on, and it's great to see it pop up here, is social inclusion. And you can broaden that and call it equity. Interestingly enough, there was this big federal government Smart Cities Challenge, and cities were invited to submit proposals. And, in Waterloo region, we partnered with Communitech and Rogers and, dozens of others. And surprisingly to many people, what did we focus on for our Smart City Challenge? It wasn't transportation or physical infrastructure. It was healthy children and youth. How do we use technology to help our kids? And especially, how do we use technology to help kids who are less advantaged? So I totally agree. I think there's tons of opportunity in social inclusion and equity for smart city solutions.
Good. Glad to see that there's some alignment going on there. So we can go as wide and deep as we want in smart cities. I think it's about establishing priorities and taking action to get some action and work towards solutions towards some of those problems. So that ties in, I guess, where I want to go with the next question. I'm gonna turn it over to Neil to weigh in on this one first. Is the notion of collaboration. I think we all agree that no one individual group can effectively develop a smart city solution or a future city solution or a strategy for that matter. It takes inclusivity. It takes multiple groups. What do you see as the role of collaboration and what groups do you think need to come to the table to make sure we develop an effective strategy and rollout plan?
Well, I mean, it's really at the core of our strategy, to be honest. I think we're very public in not wanting to tackle, the future of smart cities alone. I think we've been very, very proactive in finding all the right partners from sort of coast to coast. About a year and a half ago, we engaged on a research collaboration with UBC, and that was a combination of infrastructure but research dollars. And so that was kind of where we deployed our first municipal campus 5G network. But as part of that, what we did is we had a call for proposals out to the researchers on campus, and we actually received 34 proposals. And so similar to sort of the cash dinner conversation, we sort of upped it a level and went to the academic community there, and we asked them to sort of give us their best ideas on what future of smart cities. And so we've been really engaged on some smart transportation projects there. I mentioned the earthquake early detection project. There's some other interesting collaborations that we're doing there. More recently, we even held a hackathon with the students. And so we even, sort of went to the students and asked them for different ideas on, hey, if you had a set of LiDAR data, what could you do with that? What kind of applications could you build? And so they came up with all sorts of really interesting ideas around vulnerable users and curbside management and dispatching of emergency vehicles. So there was some really kind of cool ideas that came out of that. And, I think it just sort of speaks to even the work that we're doing at Communitech. And Mike, I really liked how you talked about being very user-centric. And that's exactly why we have in place with, Waleed kind of leading the charge. That's exactly why we have the Create Lab, because it's a design thinking led approach to co-creation. And we've been bringing some of our municipal partners in there. City of Kitchener, as an example, we've collaborated with. City of Kelowna, we've done some engagements with, and it is very much sort of user centric, and we definitely take that approach, which is, I would argue, is kind of a real differentiator for us as a service provider, in that we're not just thinking about the tech, we're thinking about the end user. And I think that for us, I think that's helping us achieve sort of better clarity on what the future might look like. Then finally, this week we finally announced that we've announced a number of projects with the University of Waterloo, and in that relationship, we're again building another campus-wide network. But we've had an opportunity to collaborate with Communitech, the region, the City of Kitchener, the City of Waterloo, the university, obviously. So we're able to bring in academia, public sector, private sector. We work with startups, coming from the Encore program. This is like, we have no illusion that this is something that we're going to solve on our own. And so we're hyper focused on finding the best partners, engaging with them and collaborating around this. And we're kind of excited in the sort of the leadership role we can play in that.
Awesome. All right, I just cognizant of time, and we want to get to a couple other questions and back to the audience, but maybe we'll launch the next poll right now. It's probably going to take a little bit longer to fill out, but I'll get that to come up, and we'll get everybody to weigh in on that, and then we'll have an opportunity to chime in. Maybe while I don't know, Cash, if you're in a position to be able to parallel process, but what are your thoughts on the notion of collaboration? How does that fit in with Interact strategy?
Yeah, very aligned with what Neil was just saying, and we know what we're good at. We're those guys that are in the digital information exchange kind of business, and today that's in the dollars and cents that we have helped Canadians move. But as that concept of what value is today evolves, we'll continue to actually work with others, because we know that what people perceive as valuable will change, and we don't necessarily have line of sight into all of that. So whether it's working with the likes of Communitech and our lab, whether it's the likes of working with academia through our relationship with the lab and the interns that we get through them, And we've also partnered with a plethora of organizations. I'm not sure if any of you know of the Knowledge Society. We typically go to academia, we typically go to universities. We also go to the Knowledge Society. These are children aged 14 to 17. And we recently hosted an event with them where we tapped them on the shoulder to say, how would you actually envision the future of financial services and open or consumer-directed finance? Just as an example, because we know that they're going to be the next ones that are consuming a lot of these financial services products. And so how do we tap into that? But bringing it back to smart cities, we last year did a pilot with electric utilities here in Ontario. And the idea was we went in with this, if you were to provide a hypothesis of, if you were to provide people with a real-time incentive today to help them through like little nudges, would they be willing to actually do something today for potentially something better tomorrow? Would they change their behavior? It's kind of question mark. And what we learned was, we did a few different use cases. One is, would people be willing to actually delay the charge of their electric vehicle? Would they be willing to like sell back their green energy to the energy utility company at a time where it is identified as being periods of high greenhouse gas emissions? And so through that 4-month pilot, what we learned was that not only were people willing to do that because of the real-time incentive that they were getting through our e-transfer rail, but over the duration of the pilot, their threshold started to increase in how they were adjusting their behavior, because they realized, actually, me delaying the charge of my EV really has no impact on like whether I do it now at like 6 o'clock in the evening or whether I do it at 9 o'clock at night and for a longer period of time. And so it was interesting to see how naturally people were willing to change what their behaviors were. And then knowing that these behaviors then over the long term become repeatable behavior, all with the goal of reducing your carbon footprint overall. And it's a win-win. It's a win for us in terms of environmental sustainability. It's a win for the energy utility company because they don't have to invest in like crazy infrastructure for these like one-off peak periods. It's not like cloud computing where you can scale up and scale down. They've actually got physical infrastructure. So Mike's, nodding his head because he's like, yes, you got to spend a lot of money on that stuff. And so those are the kind of examples where you need to lean on the organization and what their secret sauce is. How does it complement what your secret sauce is and this values that you're trying to address in the market to come up with some pretty meaningful use cases that you can potentially solve for.
Yep.
And Kevin, if I could, just back on your whole question of collaboration, and it's interesting to see the poll results, and not surprising, I think. I just want to expand on, so everybody talked about partnerships and collaboration between private sector, public sector, not-for-profit sector, so I just wanted to add the not-for-profit sector. Public, private, academia, that's sort of, I think we all get that, and we've seen good examples of it. You all talked about some good examples. But when we start talking about smart city solutions in the realm of social inclusion, equity, healthy children and youth, those kinds of things, in many communities, we have amazing not-for-profit organizations doing amazing work, and some of them really intensely innovating. In our local community, our Chamber of Commerce does their annual Business Excellence Awards. The organization that won their innovation award this year was our local food bank, because they had developed some really cool solutions for how they connected people with food with people who needed food. So I want to broaden it out and say partnerships and collaboration, academia, public, private, and not-for-profit sector.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we talk about inclusivity, but we have to more than talk about inclusivity. We have to practice. And I think we often feel that we are being inclusive, but then when you pull it apart and you look at how boards are constituted, how committees are constituted, how teams are constituted, then you realize that we've got a bit of work to do there. And I firmly believe those that do it well will result in superior outcomes.
Yeah, and on the not-for-profit side, one of the reasons that some of those organizations are so innovative is completely by necessity, right? They are resource constrained. And so they are constantly looking for, how do we do things better, more efficiently, faster, cheaper? So actually, we got a lot to learn, I think, from that sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I will encourage, I see some questions that are coming in, and we certainly want to get to those just as we're waiting for that to happen a little bit. And I'm just waiting for a curated set to come in. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, how we have to talk about COVID and the effect that COVID-19 has had on how we think about cities and smart cities and how we've reacted. And Neil, you've talked about how many, we've got 40% of the workforce now working from home, and that's put stress on your enrich and things of that sort. Is this, you know, are we learning things about COVID-19 that we can positively channel into a future city strategy? So just looking for all of you to weigh in on that question.
I can start, you know, just, you know, as a municipality, and especially a municipality that has responsibility for public health, we've just been immersed in this for the last, you know, 3 or 4 months. So I think, you know, just a couple of observations. One is there's opportunities and learnings that have come out of this that I think we can all build on, right? So, you know, the resiliency, the rapid adaptation of organizations to just disruptive change. I think many organizations, I'll say municipalities in particular, you know, we're not necessarily known to be, you know, really fast moving organizations. We did, you know, we adapted in, you know, 48 hours, 72 hours, and, you know, went to complete remote operation. So I think many organizations have learned a lot about move fast, make decisions quickly, adapt, that we can all build on. So that's probably on the positive side. There's some challenges. You know, one in particular that is really municipalities, cities are pondering is mobility and transportation networks and transit in particular. You know, how do we get to a point where people are once again comfortable using our mass transit systems? You know, Cash, you live in Toronto. You know, how TTC gets back into a safe, comfortable operation when people are jam-packed into buses, subways, and streetcars, that's a really interesting question. And if they're not comfortable using transit, then what are the implications of that? You know, are more people going to revert to single occupancy car trips and congestion and greenhouse gas emissions? Are we going to see more people using active transportation, cycling and walking? Many municipalities have taken this opportunity to say, let's open up our streets. Let's put in place more opportunities for cycling and walking as an alternative to transit. So I think the whole transportation network and how it evolves is just going to be fascinating to watch.
Absolutely. So why don't we, we've got a number of questions, so let's get to those from the audience. So this isn't assigned to anyone, so we'll ask whoever has an opinion to chime in on it. But the question is that the University of Waterloo has developed the Canadian Wellbeing Index, but it's more known in sociology circles than technology circles. How do we get the technologists to talk to the sociologists to build urban tech that addresses social needs?
I think, shall I take that one?
Sure, go ahead, Kat.
Okay. I think generally organizations, it's going to be hard for everybody to get their heads wrapped around it, but I'd say more so now than ever before. Many organizations, like Neil was saying, the number of organizations that they're partnering with is like at the yin yang, right? It's like crazy how many organizations are partnering with in all different sectors. And those that are really trying to, I would say, get ahead, and at this point, what many of us are trying to also keep up, those conversations have already started. I'll give you guys an example. Like when I started working on the innovation team, you know, people were like, what are you doing talking about smart cities? What are you doing talking to energy companies? And Heart and Stroke Foundation was another one. And it's like, we actually fundamentally believe that in order for us as Canadians to be healthy in our regular lives across all fronts, it's not just about being well in terms of your financial wellness, your financial, you know, situation. You need to be well across all facets. And so when we started talking about to electrical utilities, it was like, okay, environmental sustainability is an area. How do we now collaborate with what we do, with what they do, and come up with some use cases? Heart and Stroke, same thing. their mandate is around helping people effectively manage their blood pressure. But we know that with the onset of wearables, that is an area that Interact needs to be further, we need to be double clicking on. And so let's actually work with an organization with Heart and Stroke, seeing how we could actually lean on each other to figure out what those values are that align us as an organization to actually solve meaningful use cases. I think for now, they're going to be those one-off use cases, and collaboratives like this one is where we have an opportunity to get a good cross-section of those organizations to kind of go through that thought process of like, okay, what are the use cases that we need to solve for? Does it actually resonate with the various constituents? Who knows what piece of that pie that each one of us can help solve for? And as you gain momentum through that pie actually will just get bigger in terms of what you're addressing.
Excellent. Why don't we move on to the next question? So near and dear to my heart here, what are your thoughts on data ownership? Who owns and decides where to use personally identifiable data in a city?
I can take a stab at that one, and then maybe the others want to hop in on this. I mean, I think this is, so look, I saw a question around sidewalk labs as well. So I think it's like, I would say, if one can debate that whole program, et cetera, but I think the one indisputable benefit that came out of that whole engagement was the notion that we became very privacy aware in Canada, particularly citizens within a community. And so I think we're a regulated company. We're regulated by the CRTC. I think we've always been kind of known to preserve privacy, and I think that's kind of really something that speaks to me deeply. I don't know when you need to have personally identifiable information for many of the use cases that we're talking about. It just doesn't, it's just not necessary. Like, do I need to know it's Mike or Cash who's riding a bicycle, or do I need to know there's a cyclist, who's not paying attention to a red light? I think we take a very sort of privacy first approach to the way we think about smart cities and data collection and data storage. And I think that's the way we'll continue to sort of operate. But I think it's great that as a country we've become more aware of this topic and sort of the need to preserve that.
Cash,
I think I think as organizations, it also, the onus is on us to come to this realization that we need to have all the measures in place, and that's like table stakes at this point, put all the security stuff, privacy by design, all of that good stuff that is expected. But let's not lose sight of the fact that ultimately, us consumers, it is our data. We are the ones that are in control. It is through our consent, and we would dictate, you can use my information for this purpose, for this duration, and I'm okay with that. And I should have the full right to be able to revoke that as well. We're seeing that specifically within financial services in Canada. And in other jurisdictions, if I were to look at Australia, they're actually looking at it much broader. They're not even looking at it just with it's being regulated and instituted across the government, but they're not even looking at it just for financial services. They've actually broadened it to like apply to like telcos and utilities, and that scope is only going to get bigger as we move to like a broader data economy.
I'm absolutely shocked that it took us about 50 minutes in the Smart Cities conversation to reach the Sidewalk Labs reference. I think we turned a new leaf in the dialogue in Canada, so that's great. And I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions, and I think this one's more targeted for Mike, and it's no, actually it's for Neil, sorry. You mentioned smart transportation projects. Can you give us an idea of which areas of transportation these address?
Yeah, I mean, I probably think Mike could address this more effectively than me, but I'll take a bit of a stab at it. I mean, transportation's pretty good, but I imagine transportation to me, and the way I look at it and the way I think about it is really built on two pillars: safety and sort of congestion, right? Because I think that's what we're trying to solve for, is we want to achieve close to the Vision Zero targets, that we can, and I think that's kind of really part of the underpinning of a smart transportation solution is no more pedestrian deaths, no more cyclist deaths, and obviously no more vehicle-to-vehicle collisions that could result in deaths as well. So I think, that's kind of one core pillar. And then I always go back to, again, we've all seen the pictures of around the world of how clear the skies are because we're all working from home and we're not driving as much. And I think everybody feels really good about that. And so I think we want to continue to move in that direction. So some of the stuff that we're looking at is really about eliminating the need for congestion and reducing the amount of cars that are on the road, providing different modes of transportation. But if you are a car on the road, why are you sitting at a red light for 3 minutes waiting for the light to turn green when you know that there's no vehicles coming the other way? Like, that's just a kind of a 1980s style of transportation, and I appreciate that. Like, a lot of municipalities have legacy infrastructure, but I think if we think about where we could take things now with some of the emerging technologies, you can imagine that a concert lets out on one part of the city and you're clearing traffic at an intersection down multiple kilometers away because you can anticipate that there's going to be a whole bunch of traffic that starts to present itself in 12 to 13 minutes, and so just being a little bit more intelligent about things, I think, would improve productivity, improve sort of our greenhouse gas emissions, and just make things much safer for us all.
Yeah. And Kevin, if I just add a couple things. So yeah, I totally agree with everything Neil said. I think there's tons of really interesting work going on about, the word I use is optimize. How do we optimize our transportation networks? How do we make best use of the physical infrastructure we've got, to improve user experience? So whether it's, reducing congestion, improving travel times. So a lot of work on roads, intersections, how they operate, but also in transit and improving the user experience on transit. So, things that, we're kind of taking for granted now, like, real-time next bus information, like that actually helps the user experience. Trip planning apps for transit that are, simple, intuitive, really easy to use, like that improves the user experience. It makes it a more attractive option for people. So, I think transit, roads, optimizing intersections, and tons of interesting work. And back to the previous question around collaboration, tons of interesting partnerships. University of Waterloo has a really, really interesting research proposal. I think Rogers' a partner, the region, a couple of cities, on using all this some local tech companies. I won't get into specifics, but a lot who graduated from Communitech. So yeah, lots of good work there.
And just as a follow-up to that, we've got another question. I think we can hopefully squeeze it in. And it goes, are some cities more prime for this innovative approach than others? And I assume that's around smart cities. If so, what is holding some cities back? What are the key factors for being able to realize the opportunities?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with that. So I think the answer is yes. Different cities are at different places on this whole continuum about, readiness for change, openness to explore and innovate and create. And, so what are some of the factors that influence that? Some of them are kind of, well, I'm going to say two things. When you think about how a municipality, like any organization, functions, you've got the staff and then you've got the board of directors, the elected officials. And what you need, I think, is really good alignment between a progressive, forward-thinking staff group who are open, innovative, creative, willing to kind of explore things, and an elected council that is aligned with that. That they are also open. And, again, municipalities, like big institutions, can be pretty risk averse. And, if as municipal staff people, every time you bring forward an innovative idea, you get beat on by your board of directors, well, you're going to learn pretty quickly, like the board's not serious about, innovation. On the other hand, like, you guys work in, tech, one of the things we as municipalities learn from you is, you want to be innovative. Some things are going to work out and some things aren't. And municipalities aren't good at things not working out because you get beat up, you get publicly criticized, you get beat up in the media. So in a municipality, I think you need good forward-thinking municipal staff and good forward-thinking municipal councillors. And that comes back to communities electing good forward-thinking municipal councillors.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Any engagement I've had with a municipality, that's all it really boils down to is leadership. There's no secret sauce other than leadership wanting to get behind something and having the support from their the different branches of the municipality. It's like I can tell you that most tech companies will go where there is appetite to be innovative, and that's it's not based on necessarily any existing infrastructure investments. I mean, it's really about who the leadership is and how they partner and what their track record of executing on commitments in the past has been.
I have one thing to add to that. I think a key piece that we always lose sight of is civic engagement. 37 million Canadians, we hold the power. And so we are the ones that actually dictate and will drive what businesses and municipalities should be working for, because it's to service our needs as constituents. And so civic engagement is a big piece for all of you that have joined the call today. Like, our hands are not tied here. We all have a vested interest in moving this stuff forward too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, and I think that's a great place to leave it. And that's exactly it. This is not a spectator sport, if I may sum it up. It's great to have these kinds of conversations, but it has to go well beyond this. I mean, we tend to, as a nation, I think we tend to overstate and overanalyze the problem at the expense of not taking action to actually try and take a chance and be more risk averse and actually roll up our sleeves and get going. And that's part of the reason we wanted to have this panel. Is it's intended to kick us off. But this is the start of, maybe not the start, maybe let's call it the continuation of our journey. And we need others to step up. We need leaders like the three panelists we have today to step up, continue to step up. And we need the rest of the community. To make sure we have all groups within the community represented and set a common vision, and then let's go for it. And so, first and foremost, I want to thank our panelists, Cash, Neil, and Mike. I really appreciate your giving up some of your Friday morning to be with us. It feels like a Friday morning before a long weekend for some reason, but
always a long weekend.
There you go. Yeah, in the summertime. It's the first Friday of summer too, I guess. So that's maybe why it feels that way. And I'd like to thank the audience as well for participating in the polls, for their thoughtful questions. But again, it doesn't stop there. So in terms of next steps, we want to form working groups. We want to chunk this strategy down to initiatives that we can work towards a common goal so that we can actually be the leader in Canada, if not around the world, on executing against some of these strategies. So again, thanks for being with us. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to our audience. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. And thank you all very much for joining. Take care.